Good morning, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this Unity tutorial on how to make smooth scene transitions with both visuals and audio crossfading in less than 30 minutes. In this video, we're going to see how to use Unity animations and coroutines to make fade-ins and fade-outs when switching from one scene to another. Are you ready? Then let's dive in. Alright, so as you can see, I just opened a brand new Unity project, and for now I'm in the sample scene. I chose the 2D preset for this project, but you can choose whichever you prefer. And the first thing I'm gonna do is actually create two scenes so I can transition between something. Those scenes are gonna be real basic, they're just gonna be UI. So the first thing I'm gonna do is add a new UI object. It's gonna be a UI panel. And you see that it just spreads across the entire screen because it's set to stretch mode. I'm gonna keep that, and I'm just gonna use no texture at all, so I just have a clean canvas basically. And I'm gonna put a light color, something like that, like a basic pink. It's just so I know that I'm in the first scene. And just to make things real clear, I'm gonna create another UI element. It's gonna be a UI text, and it's just gonna have like scene 1. So it's just so I know it's scene 1. And I'm gonna put it real big on the screen, something like 48 font size, but you have to remember to increase the size of your label, otherwise it just won't show. And so I'm just gonna put it in the center of the screen like this. This is just so I know which scene I'm actually looking at for now. This is my first scene, and I'm just gonna go to my scenes in the project, rename the sample scene to scene 1. Yeah, so I'm gonna reload, and then I can actually just copy the scene. So I'm gonna duplicate it, and you see it automatically named to scene 2. So I'm gonna double click to open this one, and I'm just gonna first change the color of the background, so something like a blue, and the text to scene 2. This way now, here it's scene 2, and here it's scene 1. Okay, so we're now gonna put in the actual scripting logic for transitioning from one scene to another. For now, it's just gonna be like when I click the mouse button, it's just gonna go from scene 1 to scene 2, or from scene 2 to scene 1. This is gonna be via a script, so I'm just gonna create a new folder that I call scripts. And so in this folder, I'm gonna create a new C# script. It's gonna be called something like scene loader, for example. And I'll just double click to open it in Visual Studio. So you just have the basic Unity script for now. We're just gonna get rid of the start method because we won't be needing it for now. And in the update, I'm just gonna say that if input.get mouse button down 0, so this is basically for left click. Here I'm gonna call a method that we're gonna create in a second that is gonna be called load next scene. And so we just implement this method right below. So void load next scene. What we want this function to be doing is actually, if we're in scene 1, we want to go to scene 2, and if we're in scene 2, we want to go to scene 1. We're gonna have to get the index of our scene and just shift it around, basically. So the first thing you actually need to do is add our scenes to the build of the project. So this is going back in Unity. We want to go to File and then Build Settings. And so this is showing up basically like all the scenes that our project currently includes with their index here on the right. Scene 1 has index 0 because it's 0 indexed. And so we have to add scene 2. To do that, the easiest way is just actually to go to scene 2 and in our File Build Settings panel to just click Add Open Scenes. And so you see that now we have scene 1 and scene 2 that both have index 0 and 1. What we're going to be able to do now is actually use the Unity Scene Management module. Let's go back to our script, and we're going to add a new import. So it's going to be using Unity engine.scene management. And this module is specifically made to load scenes from your project. What we're going to be able to do now is actually get the current build index, so the build index of our current scene, and just swap it around to get the other one. First, we need to get our actual scene. This is gonna be like scene, and this is just scene manager dot get active scene. So this is our current scene, and this scene actually has a property called build index. So we can compute the next level build index just by saying that it's 1 minus our scene dot build index. This is a very common way to just swap between 0 and 1, because if you do the subtraction, you just get the other number, basically. So using this, we can now reuse the scene manager, and we're going to do a scene manager that load scene with our next level building index. And so this is just going to swap between the two. We can now add this thing in our scene. We just need to put it somewhere in our scene so the model behavior executes. I'm just going to create an empty manager object and add this component to it. It's called scene loader. Now we have it in scene 2, and we just have to add it to scene 1 as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste it, so I now have it in both scenes. If we start the game now, we can see that we're in scene 1, and that when I click, I just go to scene 2, and when I click back, I just go back to scene 1. So we now have our scene swapping mechanism. And what we want now is to have some smooth transition between the two. And for this, we're actually going to be using animations. The way we're actually going to handle this is by adding a new UI object, so a new UI panel. And once again, it's just going to cover the entire screen. We're going to call it something like crossfade, because it's going to crossfade between our scenes. So we're just going to give it a black color, and the whole point will be to use the animations to change its opacity. So we just go from like solid black to transparent, and back on to solid black when we want to crossfade between scenes. So once again, I'm just going to use no sprite, so it just covers the whole thing. And at this point, what we actually want to create is an animator controller. So I'm just going to create a new folder in my project that I'm going to call animations. It's going to hold both my animator controllers and my animations. The way you should think about an animator controller is just basically a state machine that transitions between the various animations on your object. So it's going to trigger them or stop them or fade between the animations. Here we want to create a new animator for crossfade. So we just go to animator controller and call it, for example, crossfade, and we can just drag it on the crossfade. And so we see now that we have an animator with the crossfade controller attached to it. So this is an object that can receive and use animations. Now with this object selected, you should go to the animation window. If you don't have it, it's in window, animation. So I just have it down here. So basically, as you can see for now, I don't have any clips to work on. So I don't have any actual animation asset to work on. I'm just gonna click create. And I'm going to put it in our animation folder and call it something like crossfade end for now. So this is going to be the end of a crossfade, so basically from black to transparent. So at that point, you should click the enable keyframe recording mode. What this is going to do is that whenever you change a property on your object, it's going to record, okay, at that time, that precise frame, I want this property to have this value. This is really cool to quickly set up an animation without having to go to add property and set up the value. For example, here, I want to go from black to transparent. I'm just gonna go back to a black so that it records the frame. And then I'm gonna go to something like 1 second, so 60 frame. Make sure that you're properly zoomed in or out and that you see the entire animation. So I'm gonna go to 1 second and just go to an alpha of 0. Here I have it. I just have my basic animation and I can just run through it, and I see that I've got a nice fade out animation, so the end of a crossfade. The thing that you want to be really careful about is that by default animations loop. So to avoid this, you should go to your actual crossfade end animation asset and just disable the loop time boolean. All right, so we have our end of crossfade, so now we need the start one. So I'm just gonna hit Ctrl A to select everything and Ctrl C to copy the frames. Make sure that your object is still selected so that you can go over here and click Create New Clip. This new clip is going to be the crossfade start animation. So here I can just paste my frames and I just have to switch them around so that it starts from transparent and goes to black at the end. So if I just run it, you see that I go from transparent to black. Once again, make sure that you disable looping over here. And we need to open the animator window. Once again, I just have it here, but if you don't have it, it's in window animation animator. And so what you can see is that basically this has automatically added the animations that we wanted as states. The one in bright orange is the default state. It's the one that's going to be run when you first launch your game. What we want is actually crossfade end, so that at the very beginning you fade out from black to transparent. So this is cool. The second thing that we want is actually to transition between end and start on a given trigger. So the way we're going to handle this is first we right click on this block to open the little panel and click make transition. So this is going to show us that we now have a way to go from this animation to this one. And when we click on the arrow in the middle, we see that we can set whether there is an exit time, so whether there's going to be a smooth transition between the animations. This is not what we want, because as soon as we click the mouse button, we want to directly start the fade. We want actually to disable this exit time and in the settings to make sure that the transition duration is 0. And so now the question is, what condition are we going to change this animation on? And the way we're going to do this is by using parameters. If we go over here, we see that we have a little parameters tab that we can go to, and here we can create new parameters. So those are parameters for the animator. Basically, they are variables that are local to the animator and that you can set via script. It's what's going to allow us to tell the state machine to go from a state to another one just with those parameters, and so via scripting. So for now we're going to create a trigger parameter and we're just going to call it start. So basically we're telling the crossfade animator to start a crossfade animation. And so this we're going to use in our transition. So over here in the condition we want to add a new one. So basically it just takes the only parameter that we have for now, which is good. And so now whenever we trigger the start parameter in our animator controller, this animator instance is going to go from the end to the start animation. And so we're going to have our little fade in, fade out animation. All right, so now we want to actually use this parameter in our script. For now, we're just clicking and it automatically goes from one scene to another. What we want is to be able to call this animation, and when it's done, after the 1 second time span as we've defined, it will eventually go to the next scene, but we want to first play the animation. If we go back to our script, we need to do two things. The first thing we need to do is actually add a reference to our animator so that we can call it and trigger its start event. We're just going to have a public animator crossfade. So this is going to be the reference to our animator. And the second thing we want to do is in our load next scene function, we don't actually want to run all of the logic at once. We want to be able to run it over a short period of time. And so the trick for that is to actually use IEnumerators. Rather than having a void function here, we're going to use the IEnumerator variable type. And so this is basically a way of having a second thread in our game. And so without blocking the execution of the main thread, you can run something on the side. It's not just happening all at once, it's gonna run over a given period of time, and it will be able to wait for some time, then do some stuff, and then wait again, and then finally exit. So as you can see, the first warning to get is that not all code paths return a value, and this is because IEnumerators need to use the yield instruction. This is something like yield return, And so, for example, we can yield return a new wait for second. This is the way to tell Unity, okay, wait for a given amount of time and then do something. Right now, if we do that, we're gonna have something that's a little bit weird, where we just like wait and then suddenly change. But we're not calling our animation. So what we want to do is, before we wait, use the crossfade animator. And so we're gonna use crossfade.setTrigger, and we called it start. What this is gonna do is basically start the animation, then wait for 1 second while the animation is playing, and then eventually go to the next scene. But turning it into an IEnumerator function means that it's now what's called a coroutine. And so coroutine can't be just called like this. You have to actually use the built-in start coroutine method, and then you pass it the function that you want to start inside of it. So now going back to our editor, before we run anything, we actually need to assign the animator that we talked about, because we created the public variable, but we haven't assigned it. So in our manager, we want to take this crossfade object and drag it in the inspector so that it knows what animator to call when we do the set trigger start thing. And now, if we start the game, we're going to see two things. So the first thing is that at the beginning, we have a fade in, which is really nice. That's because it's the default animation for our animator. And then when I click, I get the animation, and then I get to scene 2. On scene 2, I don't actually have a nice fade in because we haven't copied our objects yet. So let's do that. So I'm going to stop the runtime, and I'm just going to take this crossfade here and copy it. Go to my scene 2. So I'm just going to paste it and drag it into the canvas. It's retained all its properties, and so we just need to assign it once again to the manager. Now if I go back to scene 1 and I run the game, we're going to get first the fade in from scene 1, then I click, get fade out, fade in from scene 2, then I click, get fade out, fade in from scene 1, and so on. We've successfully made a smooth transition between our two scenes using a little fade to black technique. But remember that I also talked about sounds and music for a transition. What if you have some soundtrack that is playing over your scene and you want to go from scene 1 to scene 2 or vice versa? One technique is to just keep your audio manager around so the music stays in the background. But here we want to fade in and out the music as well. The way we're going to do this is, funnily enough, via animations too. The idea is that we're going to have another object that handles the audio and that has an animation on its sound volume. Similarly to the opacity of our black screen, we're just going to put the volume from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 0. First, let's create this new game object. It's just going to be an empty one that I called audio. And so I'm just going to put an audio source on it. Go to the audio sub-menu, and then you have audio source. And here in my project, I just added a little folder with audio with personal composition. There's going to be a link in the description. I'll just make this music CC0 resource, so you'll just be able to download it free of charge and use it in your projects. No attribution required. But anyway, so I'm just going to click and drag this one and put it in the audio clip. You have to make sure that you play it on awake and that you loop it. So if I play the game now, we're going to have some audio in the background. Alright, so we have this little music going around. But of course, the thing is that it doesn't have any fade in, fade out routine yet. And if I click to go to scene 2, it just stops abruptly. And that's because we don't have any audio manager in the second scene. Before we copy this element, we actually want to put in the animation first. So once again, remember that animation means animator. But we are not going to create a second animator controller. What we're going to do instead is actually go to our animations and create a new animator override controller. We're going to call this one something like music crossfade. And what this does is it's actually capable of taking in all the parameters of your original animator controller and just override the animations that it should call. So if here in the animator controller I put in my crossfade, you see that I have two slots that I can drag animations to. crossfade in and crossfade start. And so those are the two states that we had before. Remember that in our animator we had those two animations. So what we want to do now is actually create those new animations. So remember to select your object, so here audio, and go to your animation tab. We're going to create a new clip that we're going to call music crossfade start. Crossfade start means that we want to go from a volume of 1 to a volume of 0 because we're actually going out of the scene, so we want the sound to get lower and lower. Remember to enable the recording and then just record frame 0 with a volume of 1. And then at 1 second, you just want to record another frame with volume at 0. So this is our fade start, and we want to copy everything and create a new clip that is music crossfade end. We just copy our frames and we just switch them around. So that for our crossfade end, we just go from a volume of 0 to a volume of 1 over here. And so the thing that we want to be really careful about is that for now, we've actually created another animator. So this is not the right way to go. It's been done automatically because I've just created animations on my object. Instead of using this controller, I actually want to use the music crossfade that I prepared earlier. And so here, when I select my object again, you can see that it refreshed the states and that it shows us the crossfade end and crossfade start states that we had before. The final thing we want to do is in our project animations folder, we want to destroy the audio animator that we created and that we won't be using. And in the music crossfade, we want to actually assign the animations that should be played for this specific override controller. Just click and drag the music crossfade end and the music crossfade start. The other thing we need to make sure we disabled is on these two clips, the loop time should be turned off. Otherwise, it's just gonna loop again, fading the music in and out. Now, if we start the game, we should be able to hear quite a subtle fading at the very beginning. But it's not yet linked to our scene changing mechanism. So what we want to do is in our manager, so in the scene loader, we want to add another reference to the music crossfade animator. Let's go back to our script and just copy this line and call this one something like music crossfade. And when we trigger one, we actually want to trigger the other as well at the same time. If we go back to the editor and we assign this second variable, so remember to click and drag the animator, you now see that we have two animators and that if we run the scene, we actually get this little subtle fading at the very beginning, and when I click to switch to the other scene, it just fades out. In the second scene, we haven't yet copied our audio manager, so there is no sound, so let's take care of this. I'm just back to scene 1, and I'll just copy this object, go to scene 2, paste it here, and remember to assign it to your manager. And so now if I go back to scene 1 and I just play the game, we're gonna have those little fades-ins and fade-outs on both the dark screen and the music, so pay attention. Alright, so that's the first fade-in. Now I'm gonna click. You see that we have the fade-out of scene 1 and the fade-in of scene 2, and once again if I click, I'll go back to scene 1 with the fade-in and the fade-out. That's it for today, folks. We now have a basic system to smoothly transition between our Unity scenes. We've seen how to make a crossfade switch based on animations, both for visuals and our sounds, and it only took us a few lines of C# to stitch everything together. You could take this further by using another music or another fade screen color in the second scene, or by doing other nice transition animations for the black screen, like shown in this brackets tutorial. Don't hesitate to post comments with your ideas on how to improve and experiment with this feature. And in the meantime, feel free to like and share this video or to subscribe to my channel so you know as soon as new videos come out. Thanks for watching and take care.